So this week we are talking. We're starting the first section of the book that we're following in this book club. That's on specifically on CSS, on how to style Shiny applications using CSS and related technologies like Sass. The first chapter is kind of it's a relatively deep introduction to CSS. And Lucio, who will be joining us in a couple of minutes, is going to be doing that, taking us through that chapter. For those of you watching on YouTube, this is a book club that we run as part of the R for Data Science community. And we are working through the book Outstanding User Interfaces with Shiny by David Granjon. So we're at chapter 6, CSS for Shiny. Hi, Federica. We're just waiting for Lucio to join. He's delayed a little bit after a lecture or something. But yeah, how are you doing this week?
I'm okay.
Good.
Okay. Yeah, I'm coming to Irlanda, coming to Cork next week.
Oh, really? Okay. Wow.
Yeah. Can't wait. Yeah, never
Brilliant.
been.
Is that for work or for a holiday or something?
Yeah, I will go to conference.
Cool.
Yeah. Cool.
I'm going to London a week on Friday to do a talk for something called Saturdays, which is like an hour conference in London.
I saw that. Yeah. That must be nice as well.
Hopefully, I've not managed to do it yet. I put my name down to do one in 2020, and it was cancelled with about a week notice because of COVID and everything. So this is the second one that they've held in the UK, and anyway, good. But that's cool. Are you talking at the conference?
No, I don't know. I don't think so.
Right.
It's more a workshop. We have a sort of very brief presentation of our country, because we are just very few people, and then talk about our country and how it's the health treated within the global burden of diseases and those stuff. Yeah.
How did you were presenting for the project club, weren't you? A few days ago.
Yeah. You missed it. I needed some some help. I don't know. I just made a very simple app, and so I wanted to add a few other things. Maybe I'll do in the future. I want to add an API thing to make it like there's heavy files to load and then use within a model. So yeah, I don't know how to. Maybe I found something today, because there's a BBC style visualization to do for the challenge. There is the 30 days chart challenge this month. So, and today is the BBC style chart, and so found a Shiny app which has some like things that you can use that with the pins package that you can use or download the data and have the news with a Shiny app.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's a very simple Shiny app. Yeah.
yeah. Cool. I'm just learning pins at the moment. It's yeah, it's the problems I'm having with pins aren't really the package itself. It's more all the how to connect it to where it needs to be. There's kind of authentication things and stuff like that. But yeah, it seems a very nice tool for preparing data for use in a Shiny app and that. Yeah. Cool. So what was that? That's like a 30-day chart challenge, is it, or something, or map challenge, or what?
Yeah, that's both. But in November is the map challenge. In April, the charts challenge.
Right.
Yeah. So it's on Twitter. You find it on Twitter.
Okay. Cool. I don't know quite what's. How do we do this? Okay, should I start discussing CSS? I imagine Lucio will join us in a minute. He sent me the raw text for his presentation, but I might just open up the book itself. What did he call it? Unleash. Yeah. So if I share, uh, that's weird. No, again.
If we got a couple of minutes before the end,
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to show you this BBC app and how they how do you can grab the data with pins.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that'd be brilliant. Um, okay, let's have a see. You guys are over there. Okay, right, so this week we are can you see the browser screen that I've shown up? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're talking about CSS, and we did cover a tiny bit of CSS, I think in chapter 2, but in this chapter, hold on, I'll just check if I can. Yeah, in this chapter, we are going to learn a bit more about how to how to use it and how to incorporate it in a Shiny app. Again, there's a little bit of this kind of content in Mastering Shiny. There's some there's one chapter on it in Engineering Shiny, and yeah, so there's lots of supporting kind of stories as well. So we're going to cover um, a few different things. What CSS is for, how to include it in a typical web page, how to include it in Shiny specifically, the sort of best practices for constructing a CSS file for use with your app, and then how to manipulate the CSS for a running app such that you can then take the changes you've made and incorporate them in your source code. So, for example, you can run your app in the browser, inspect the various elements on the page, and modify the CSS as it's running. And then once you've got your app running as you want it to, you can bring the changes you've made to the CSS back over to your source code. So the first thing we need to talk about is how to include CSS. So for a typical web page, For a typical web page, like the one we're actually looking at, the CSS would normally be incorporated using something like this. So you'd have link rel equals style sheet, and what that does is it pulls in a CSS file from the server where this is housed, or from some other URL in a some other site, and downloads it into the browser that the user's running, and then attaches the CSS rules to the document that's being displayed. So you can either point to an external file like that. So this is either external in that you have to download it from a content delivery network or something, or you have to download it from the server where your app is housed. Alternative ways of doing it are to insert the style definitions in the head of your document. So that would be like, here we've got a link to some external CSS file, and additionally some CSS code that's sort of hard coded into the HTML file for this web page. So all this web page will do is it will print some text to the screen and whatnot. Type in CSS code directly into an HTML file isn't recommended practice, because for two reasons. It kind of means that your web page file, the HTML, contains multiple languages rather than a single one. It kind of conflates the content of the web page with the code for just sort of defining the content of the page with the how that file should look when presented to the user. And it also means that if you want to modify the CSS, you have to search potentially a much bigger file. If all the CSS is embedded in the HTML, you'll have to search through both the HTML content and the CSS content to find the bit that you need to change if you need to update the files. So it's strongly recommended that when you write CSS, you do it in an external file. And maybe that means that you have to manipulate your app, your HTML for that app, to make use of the CSS file that you've written. But anyway, there's three different ways of doing that in this first example. There's using an external sheet, encoding the CSS in the header, and additionally you can hard code specific modifications to elements directly in the HTML content. Corresponding to those three ways of including CSS in a kind of typical HTML file, there you can additionally include CSS in a Shiny app. And a Shiny app's, as we were discussing last week, slightly different structure to a typical web page, in that, for example, you don't have an index.html file. So with Shiny, corresponding to those three different ways of including CSS, there are you can use tags $link to add an external style sheet, or you can directly encode CSS into what becomes the head element of the generated app, or you can inline styling code along with the content that it attaches to. So like I was saying, similarly to the best practices for web pages more generally, you would typically be urged to do this kind of using external CSS files to style your app, because then you've got a single place that you need to modify if you need to change the style of it. I'm assuming Lucio's not back yet, but okay. We saw in chapter 4 that there are different ways to encode the dependencies for the kind of web dependencies for a Shiny app. So, for example, we were including JavaScript files and CSS files for things like Bootstrap in that chapter, and there are tools within this package, HTML tools, that help ensure that you don't have to download the same CSS files multiple times, that you don't have to specify them in multiple places. And if there is a dependency on a more recent version of an HTML dependency, that if two different versions of the same CSS file or JavaScript file are being used within your app, HTML Tools has a way to ensure that you use the most recent version of that. Now, in a typical Shiny app, you'd have app.r at the top level, and you might have a www directory wherein you add your CSS files and JavaScript files and things like that. And those files can be made available to the running app. There are many other ways of setting up a Shiny app. So like in Golem, you might have your app in a package, and the CSS files get put in a slightly different location, and you have to specify where within the server to find the CSS file that you need for your running app, and you can use this HTML dependency thing to ensure that the path to the CSS files that you need are made available when your app is running. So there's a way to include that. So this, what's described here, is basically a kind of replacement for hard coding the location of that CSS file. What are we on? It's also fine. Okay, right. Have we got all? Is everyone here now? Is Lucio here? Yes, Lucio is here.
Hello, Russ.
Hiya. Sorry, I didn't realize you were in the room yet.
I got in a little bit ago.
Okay, cool. Do you want to take over because you've got your presentation kind of in place?
Yes, sorry for the delay. I was
in
a class in college, and it finished as soon as this session started. So I tried to run to a nearby Wi-Fi spot. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so well, I will continue from where Russ left off. We were dealing with how to include CSS files into our application, and they're receiving a comment about, from the author of Shiny. Should we really be using this function over here, the HTML dependency function, in order to include some custom CSS, something that we ourselves as the user define? He actually mentions that, at least for those cases, really it's not necessary to use this specific function. We can limit ourselves to use the simple way of using a link element in order to reference the external CSS file. And I will share or here the comment in case someone is interested in that part. So, at least for the content, how I have structured it, I made a couple of changes also, not only in the content itself, but also how it is structured, because in this chapter and in the next one, and really all throughout the book, there is not really big enough loop or deep enough loop at working with CSS and actually customizing the user interface. But mostly the book tries to tell us how can we set up, for example, our dependencies or our files, so that such customization that it can flow naturally and without much issue. So what I try to complement in this chapter is actually like some practical examples on how we can customize the user interface. Sorry, and from that idea, I will be providing many properties for CSS along the examples that I will be sharing in this presentation. So first, CSS is not really a programming language, neither a markup language like HTML. It's just a style sheet language. So what we do is we declare some styles that we want for specific elements. And in particular, as we can see in this syntax for how to declare CSS code, we perform a selection that is specify which HTML element do we want to modify or your style. And then we set the name of the property, for example, something like color or background color, and then the value of such property. In the book, they mention some basic ways of using CSS selectors. And I added a little bit in that point because they didn't mention a really recent feature that has been added to CSS. It is called, well, it is labeled the parent selector. So I want to touch in that part later on. So really in this part, it's basically divided as basic CSS selectors, kind of like intermediate, and then some, they are not really advanced, but they are more like almost intermediate, almost basic, not too advanced. So from of the basic types, we can select an HTML element via its tag name. For example, we can choose so that for every span element in our page, set its color to be red. Or also similarly, we can choose multiple HTML elements in the page. In this case, we want that for all P elements and div elements, we apply the same styling. In this case, it is just changing the background color. And so in order to visualize this, I have prepared a little very basic page so that we can see this part over here. For example, when they perform, let me open up the file. When we perform this span change to red, basically what we can see over here for this particular span element, over here, the span it contains another as text, then that version of text has been colored as red. And something similar for the background color, so P and div elements. Over here, this paragraph and this div element, both of them have a background color of lights and so that is one basic way, selecting via the tag name. Another is selecting via the class or the ID. These are attributes of an element. Why do we use class or ID? Well, class, you define it if you want to set a style for one or many elements. You want all of them to share the same style. For example, we can define a class. We are using this dot character, then the name of the class. And over here would be the properties that every HTML element with the class of random, they would share these specific properties. And contrary to that, you can define the ID attribute for an element. And that is basically to set a style that you want for only one specific element in your page. And now the syntax changes. First, there is I don't know, I will call it hashtag, and then the name of the ID. And again, you simply define your CSS styling for that particular element. In this case, I define these 3 paragraphs. And the 3 of them share the class random, but this last one has an ID not random. And what we apply to such elements, to those 3 paragraphs, is simply that for every element of class random, we set a color and background color. And if the ID is not random, then we change the color to red. So as we visualize this effect into the page, as we can see over here, then there was a sort of hierarchy, because the style for the ID, that is this part over here, this red color, has overwritten, sorry, this golden color that was also being applied to this specific paragraph over here. And that's because such paragraph has a class of random and an ID of not random. And over there is where there is an important part of what it is called specificity. And that is basically how does the browser manage to set which style to actually apply to a specific element. In a particular case, there are many phrases, for example, as we can see over here, or many different declarations where there is a conflict. For example, or here this color crimson, or here color gold for this same element. And then there are some rules for specificity in order to choose then which of these we choose. And in particular, IDs are more specific than classes. So that is why this one is chosen in this particular case. Then there is a mention about what is a pseudo class. That is basically to specify a state of the selected element. These examples I have provided them over here in the page as well. So for this intermediate section, I simply define an order list. Yeah, an order list, and well, these are the list items. Then what we apply to this specific list is this. Oh, let me change the file and apply this specific rule. Okay, so it's pseudo class. The syntax for the pseudo class is well, it is using this I know the name, double dot. I will call it double dot. And then the name of the pseudo class. So for example, what we are specifying over here is that for this item, when the mouse, well, or the no, yeah, when the mouse is on top of this element, is hovering over it, and we change the color. In this case, if we click in this specific list item, then the font size will duplicate. We have also another type of pseudo class. So the list item, that it is at the first child, as you can see over here. So over here, which of these is the first child? Well, this would be the second child, and this will be the last child. So for the first child, there is only this one over here that says first. We apply this specific for we basically underline the text. And there is also another useful pseudo class. I think it wasn't mentioned in the yes, not especially powerful at all. Well, so it's basically what we would expect for every list item that it is not a first child. So in this particular case, it would be this second and this third items. then we simply change the color to red. So let's see how does it actually get executed. Let's see. Okay, say hover, it is changing color. As I click, it is changing font size as well. And the other ones, for example, first child is getting underlined, and it is working fine. And now, not for the state of an element, but to a specific part of that element, something like, well, now we can see what to the initial part of the element, or the last part of the element, or maybe just the first letter in this case of this specific paragraph. Well, we can perform some transformations. So again, if we take a look at examples, what are we doing? We have defined some paragraph, and we apply, well, this specific style is over here. At the beginning of the paragraph, we add this string of words. Now to the first letter of the current paragraph, that would be this letter R, we will turn it to uppercase. And the last part, we simply add at the end of the paragraph this other string. So really the outcome is just, we can see right here. It was the initial paragraph, it was the after, this was the before. I cannot highlight it. And again, the first letter, this R got uppercase. Well, one may wonder, why are these things useful? Why are before and after several elements useful? And really, they are quite useful. At least from what I have seen in, well, in initial front exercises, well, mostly CSS, they do get used quite a lot. For that reason, I wanted to include over here some pretty cool backgrounds that you can define for any element using this before and after. So maybe I'll share the link if one wants to see it. The YouTube channel is full of really cool CSS tricks. Okay, so now for the part about attributes, well, attributes are simply like properties that we define for HTML elements. They can change the behavior of those. For example, they can make, and we can see over here, if we specify this specific attribute to some element, in this case, it is the EM element. Well, now the EM in the actual page, you can modify such text. As we can see over here, this is the EM. It says write any code here, but now I can change that text. Right. And that is thanks to this specific attribute. There are attributes for HTML element. In this case, this one rows applies to what it is called the text area element. And the generic one, so say you want to encode some information into an element, but there is not really a already predefined attribute in order to do that. Well, you can use this one. It allows you to define a generic attribute. So you first put data, well, this character, and then the name that you want, and simply the value that you want to store. Actually, this one comes quite a lot. If you take a look at the Shiny JavaScript code, at the Shiny at the JavaScripts, at the scripts that get generated when Shiny creates your app, you see many times this data line and something. So it is quite useful and mostly versatile. And well, like, what is your thing, right? So for attributes, I define some div. I encode into it that it has 3 children, and this is also the tab index, so that you can focus on that element when you press tab. Simply some bullet words, some text area with a specific attribute, and well, I already showed you this one over here. What I am doing is simply setting a border, then like following that border. So as you can see over here, there is a slight box over here for this box. And lastly, well, we can also change the opacity of the text from 0 to 1 or 2. And that's why this looks as this, because this is the we can change the content. Okay, so maybe let's look at the part about really it's not advanced. Maybe like yes, a little bit more about intermediate. So up to now we've been mostly focusing on single HTML elements and perhaps some particular characteristics of the HTML, like there are several class, several elements or attributes. But now we have to keep in mind that the model of a web page, it's really like a tree. And a tree in the sense of like we are used to for an ancestral tree. So there is a parent, like let's say an initial parent, and then all of the elements are some descendant out of it. In this case, we can see that directly from the code, specifically from this part. If HTML tag is a parent, if children is head, its other child is body, and then for example, for body, where is children? Well, H2, H3, P, such and such. So in front end, there is always this notion of ancestor, descendant, child, and such. So it is natural that there's also a way to select specific elements by using such a tree structure. In this case, it's nesting structure of the HTML elements. So in this part, I define. Let's see, I define over here for nesting. I simply define an order list. So the outcome of this code, it will simply be follow. Let's see. Well, this, but imagine that there is no, maybe let me remove the style. Okay, so this would be the outcome of this list. So now what we want to do is for example, maybe I want to follow the list items, so I can do something like the list items that are a child of the another list. So something like this one. This is a child of UL because it is directly inside of this one. Or for example, another one, this title is it's also a child of this other UL element. Well, for those, they will be color green. And however, take note in the fact that this same list item, well, it is not a child of this one. It is actually what, let's see. This one is a child of UL, and UL is a child of this one. So this one is the, let's say, the grandson of this one. But in particular, it's a not direct descendant. That is not a child, but it is a descendant. And that would be useful because now this is applying that specific coloring to all list items, as we can see over here. Let's see the code. Over here. So let me actually include it in the file. So now I included this. Let's see. Okay, so I am going to play the whole. Well, so every list item is getting color green, but maybe I want to color only the list items that are nested ones. So in this case, it would be this one, and this two over here as well. Well, how can we get that extractor from this particular HTML element? Well, what characterizes this nested list item? Well, as I said before, it is a child of a UL because it is a nested list, but also this UL is the child of the list item. So we can represent that child relationship with this. And now for those specific list items, we can convert them right. And that is what happened to us. And of course, this works for this particular list. If there were more nesting, then we would have to change the code to make it work. But that's the idea so far. And now, if you don't want to specify a child relationship, maybe just like a descendant relationship, something like this UL is a descendant of UL. Well, then simply don't use the character. Just leave some space between them. And for example, what we're doing over here is we're getting all the list items that are a descendant of the OL items, that is of the order lists. That is what happens over here. So we're simply retrieving all the list items with this code. And in this case, I think it changed. Yeah, I changed the font family to cursive, and that is why every list item will change this particular font. Okay, but as you saw from reading this particular code about nesting, we are. Let me do this. Okay, we are performing a descendant selection based on properties of ancestors. As we did over here, right? We chose some descendant because it is a, well, particularly because it is a descendant of this OL item. However, can we go the other way around? That is, when we perform ancestor selection based on properties of its descendants. I think last year or 2021, we couldn't do that in CSS. Of course, we could do that in JavaScript, but at least not directly via CSS. However, what allows us to do that is what is called a class pseudo class. So it allows us to perform an ancestor selection based on properties of its descendants. It already has very good browser support. I think that Firefox still doesn't have support for it, but Safari and Chrome, they do. And over here, I also share a link. I think it's from the same guy there, of why this particular pseudo class is so useful, so powerful. So let me share the link as well. In this case, I will just show a pretty basic example of using this pseudo selector. But remember, it is a pseudo selector, so it has this kind of syntax. So what we are doing over here, we are selecting all divs that have an ancestor, sorry, a descendant that there is a P that has been clicked. This is not equivalent, this active pseudo class to being clicked, but we can assume that it is because it's basically that. So we're simply selecting all the divs that have some descendant, that it is a paragraph, that it is a P, and it has been clicked. So let's see the outcome of that. There is this paragraph. They find some div and two children, two paragraphs. So as the code says, I click the paragraph and then the div has to get this type of, it's like a border, but it doesn't occupy space in the browser. So it behaves more nicely if you want just to take a look at what space are your elements occupying. And we can see from this one, as I click in this particular paragraph, then the border of its parent of this container is changing. I am clicking. And similarly over here, we can define some table. There is 2 rows and 2 columns. So just different. And as I already told, we can perform the following. And that is that is this one over here. Let me get back to it. Okay. So for this table, right? For this table, if some of its cells has been covered with the mouse, then in that particular case, then get all of the cells from the same table that have not been covered. So select all the non-covered cells from the table whenever one cell has been covered. Now, for that specific condition, then this cell is not covered. Simply blur the image. Well, blur the content a little bit. So now I go to such a specific table, this one, and if I hover the number 4, then the other cells get blurred. So really, it's not just a parent selector, because in this case, we are choosing based on some cell, I am affecting its siblings, these other cells. Well, they are not particularly its siblings. For example, over here, yes. Over here, it is its siblings. But that is just to emphasize that this has a pseudo class. It is not just a parent selector, but it is much powerful than that. You can select siblings and perform some pretty cool animations. So maybe just to enter that part, I will cover the content about animations. Well, the author mentions a way to do it, that is by defining some keyframes. Let me get back to it. Okay, so you define some keyframes. You put the name of your animation, and you can replace this from 2 as a 0% of completion of the animation, or when it has already, when it is the last step. And again, there is now also some syntax in order to apply such a specific animation, well, for some element. And this will be the standard order for the arguments. But there is also another way to perform animations in CSS, and it is much simpler. It was mentioned in this chapter, but that is to use a transition CSS property. What it is allows us to do is to smoothly change the value of some property. So, for example, let me see. I am going to define a transition. Well, because it is simpler than a keyframe. So I define some paragraph. It has a red background color, but now when I hover over such paragraph, then I will change that property. So it's important that it is the same. It is simply being changed its value. But now that it is being changed, I can add a transition, specify what is the name of the property that it is changing. In this case, background color. And then I specify what is the length of time, what I want for this smooth animation to work. So let's take a look at this. The paragraph. No, there is no paragraph. It's and well, it is simply a piece. Okay, I am hovering now. You can see how the color is changing smoothly. So in that sense, you can actually define an animation. And every time that you are changing one or more properties of an element, and we did over here, is changed due to this interaction. And the other way is a more complicated one, but you also get more control out of it. And if that is you define some keyframe, and now I will activate such animation when I hover over this particular rectangle. It will last 2 seconds. It will run linearly, and that is simply the name of the animation. So at the beginning, there is no translation in the x-axis. That is to the right. At the half of the animation, it should have been translated 70% of its width. And now when I finish, then it should have been translated well completely, all of its width. So now I hover over this rectangle. Sorry, again. And as you can see, well, it is occurring. And this last part, right now, it is slower because, well, it needs 1 second, because half of 2 seconds is 1. It needs 1 second to change from translating only the remaining part, that is 30% of the rectangle. It is not getting collapsed, it is getting translated, but I think there is an overflow issue, so that is why it seems to be disappearing. So there is a question. Does the CSS calculating the transition for the calculating the transition from one state to another? What do you mean by calculating the transition?
Well, so it seems like it's moving from one color to the next, like in a smooth way. So it's like calculating, I guess, all of the hex codes in between, like where you start and where you end. If I can talk about it that way.
Yes, it is doing that smoothly. So it is calculating now.
That's really cool. I got to read this transitions doc. Thanks.
Okay. Well, to finish up, because well, probably is the most important part of this chapter, is this issue about layouts. Basically, there's not much time. I will try to read. So basically, many XML elements can be modeled as boxes. In particular, we can do that for those that have the property that they are block level. That is, when you create them, they don't generate a new line. So block level, no, sorry, block level, they do generate a break line. Or here there is a line. And for those elements, you can model them as a box. For example, for this particular box in red. So if I press Control, now if I double click into it and press inspect, then we get this menu. In this part in the right, we get this box representation of this particular element. So again, there are some important properties about the spacing in that box. So, well, you have already read it about padding, border, and margin. So I will not mention that much more, but basically there are 2 main modules at least in CSS in order to extract the content of your web page. These 2 popular ones are Flexbox, and the other one is CSS Grid. Well, because we are working with Shiny, we are already familiar with Flexbox because Shiny uses Bootstrap, and Bootstrap has defined its grid system using Flexbox. So basically, we already know what it is doing, how it is wrapping the content whenever for example, whenever the width of the screen is pretty small. However, there is an important difference because it's not like this flexible model is better than CSS Grid. They are simply different. They both support content placement in 2 dimensions. However, the main reason for choosing one over the other is that for accurately controlling the position of items, well, it is better to use CSS Grid. However, if you want to allocate your items flexibly, that is, sometimes it's going to change its width or its height. Again, depending, for example, depending on the width of the screen from which you're seeing the page. Then in those cases, of where there is for you need this flexibility, then Flexbox is a, I don't want to say better, it's a recommended model to use, recommended tool. Lastly, just to finish up, an example of that particular case is something that we're already familiar, but maybe I can explain a little bit of this code. So I find some container, I am going to give it for this element a class flex container. So I will be using Flexbox. So for this container, I use the play flex, and I will set flex grab so that if there is not enough space for the elements of this container, then I want the elements to no longer be in a row, but to put it into another row. So like almost like a stacking them. I'm sorry, there is a comma. Okay. So well, there is a part for the container. So flex move the items into multiple rows if they don't fit in one row for this particular screen. And lastly, well, for the children of this container, that is ellipse, we're going to set some width, some aspect ratio, and then simply some background color. So that's the basic idea. As I see what is the outcome of that code, what is just this part over here. I have this div from other part of the code, it is being outlined because it's a previous declaration, not one that I already mentioned over here. And these boxes in red, those are the children, the divs. Now, the interesting part about Flexbox and this whole idea of responsive web design is that we can use this, what is called a media query. So that is changing, modifying the styling of your page depending on some parameters of the screen that you're using for visualizing that page. In this case, a parameter that we are using is the width of the screen. What we are doing over here is if the width of the screen is 600 pixels or less, then we're simply going to change the width of these boxes in red. We're going to change it to 500 pixels instead of its initial value to 100. And just to finish up, that is the outcome that we see as I change the weight of this screen. Okay, so it got pretty small. So now the weight has increased as I specified over here, because the weight was smaller than 600 pixels. Well, there is a comment about PMM. It has a notation for a better clarity of the CSS code that you're defining. But that's really well, thank you to particularly to Raz because he's the only one left. And really that's it for me. If there is any questions or comments.
Oh, hello. Right. No, that was brilliant. A lot of people. I know that Arthur disappeared a couple of minutes ago for another meeting. I imagine others did too. But yeah, no, that was great. There were so many things in there that I haven't seen before. The has pseudo class and some of the animation related things. It was really good. Yeah. Thanks, Lucio. That was brilliant. Yes. Oh, yeah, I guess we ought to wrap up. So you're unlikely to be able to attend any of the other book club sessions for Shiny, the user interface thing. Is that right? Okay. Anyway. Okay, I'll say bye. Right. Anyway, so next week we're doing a talk about SAS, which is a kind of CSS preprocessor for for use. Thanks everyone for attending. See you later.